And all right, so let's talk about HTTP. So this is something you guys might have heard of before. It's going to be just a high-level introduction, not too detailed. Let's actually get into it. So what does HTTP stand for? That's Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Again, many of us probably are familiar with this. What is HTTP used for? So we have HTTP to have a standard protocol for communication over the web. So usually we have two parties that are communicating. We have a client and then we have a server. So most of the time for clients, it's you. You're interacting with a web page, whether it be Google or Amazon. You have a web browser. That's the client application, and that is what's sending HTTP requests, right? So you request something from a database or a server or whatever it might be. You're sending an HTTP request out there that's going to be responded to. And once you get a response, your client will process that response. On the other side, you have servers. So this is what you're interacting with. So your web browser will likely call a web server that will send back a HTTP response. So the response will have some information in it. Usually it'll be like an HTML document that your browser can parse and display for you. But yeah, the servers usually process the request and then send back a response. HTTP is generally plain text, meaning it's human readable. It's just like, you could see the text and read it and understand it without kind of having to parse it or look up anything too complicated. But yeah, so it's used as plain text and sent as plain text over the web. All right, just the background, high-level introduction to HTTP. Let's talk about request methods. So when you're sending an HTTP request, it's got to be a certain type. And so these are a few types. There's definitely more types out there, but these are the most common that you'll see. And to be honest, like get and post are the two main ones that we're going to focus on. Put and delete aren't as common, but definitely might see them in certain cases. So these methods kind of specify what your request is asking for. If you send a GET request, that means you're requesting data from a server. And this is non-destructive. So this is, again, you're just reading information. You're not modifying anything out there. You just want to get like a web page and display that web page on your browser. Opposite of GET is POST. So POST is actually where you're creating new data on a server. So this is destructive. This is where if you're submitting a form where you fill out your name, your email, whatever else, like your address, and you post it, that's going to be sent to the server, and the server is going to take that information and actually store it into a database or store it somewhere. So that post is actually modifying data on the server side. Likewise, you might have a put or delete. Puts usually are used for updating data that exists on a server, and then delete would remove data from the server. Again, I think typically we just use post most of the times. A post can actually update or remove. It's basically kind of how your server processes it. So you send a GET if you want to read something, and post if you want to add, modify, or delete something. Post can get that done. Again, these are just methods you're sending to the server, and the server is responsible for understanding what you're requesting and kind of handling the requests with a response. All right. So let's talk about the format of a request. So this is an HTTP request would be like your browser would send to a server, for example. So the very first thing is you got to have a request line. So this actually specifies what you're asking for, like what your request is all about. Then you can have some header files, which is going to give some additional data to your request. Like maybe your server cares about, what type of file you want back or format you want back. Can be many different things. There's a lot of headers out there. I'm not going to go over all of them. You can kind of Google them. Then you need a required empty line at the very end, or to separate your headers. And then you can have an optional message body. So again, optional, but you still need that empty line because it's required for your format. All right, so let's actually see a quick example. So this can be a GET request that you might send. Again, GET is used when you go to Amazon.com, you get you see a bunch of HTML pages, and then you kind of just use your browser to navigate Amazon. All right, so at the very top, you have your request line. In this case, you specify the method. So that's the GET. That's the first thing here. Then the next item is your URI. So this is the resource that you're trying to request. So in this case, I want to go to a page called donuts.html. And then I'm going to specify the HTTP protocol version. So in this case, it's 1.1. Again, there might be different versions that are handled a little differently. So you got to specify what version HTTP you want to use. All right, so that's what a request line looks like. Method, a resource, and a version. Then you might have some headers. So in this case, like I have a host. So in this case, this would be my actual website. So if I'm trying to go to platoondonutshop.com and go to the donuts page, like this is what a GET request would do. I'd be on this website and then navigate to donuts.html. This GET request be sent. The host is this website. Also, you might have other information like what browser you're using, like that can be sent. So user agent is the header for that. And in this case, Mozilla 5.0 would be Firefox version 5.0. But again, you can have many different header tags. Again, there's many out there, so kind of look them up if you're interested. But yeah, it's just more detailed information about this request. Then you need your empty line, and then finally optional message body. In this case, I have none, so you don't actually put none. It's just an empty no message body for a GET. So typically, GET requests don't use a message body. They're just simply passing all their values via their resource. So example, this could have like some additional parameters on it, like with a question mark. That like if you want to specify donuts that are only a variety of chocolate, you can pass that in the URI instead of passing in the message body. All right, let's look at a post. So post is very similar. You specify post. You have your resource. In this case, let's say you want to place an order that's actually going to likely modify something on the server. Like you're placing an order, they're going to store your order in some system. So in this case, post is the method. Order.html is the resource. Same version. Then I have my headers like before. Empty line, but then in my message body, I actually specify some information. So in this case, let's say I want to buy a chocolate donut that costs $3.50. So I'm placing an order. It'll pass the information in the message body so that it knows that I want to purchase this type of donut and then the price that I'm going to pay for, or the price I paid for it. All right, so this is post. Post usually uses the message body, whereas GET does not. Just kind of the way things are done. All right, let's get a response format for HTTP response. Again, this is one of your servers responding to a request. It looks pretty similar to a request, but a few differences. So the first line will be a status line at the top, then 0 or more header lines, then a required empty line, and then an optional message body. So the only difference is the status line versus a request line. So let's take a look at the status line. So this specifies a version first, then a code, and then I guess a textual representation of that code. So in this case, code 200 is okay. That's like a successful message you'll get. So if I request donuts.html, the server will say, okay, I found your page. Here's your page. Your status is okay because I found what you're looking for. Or I was able to handle your request successfully. Again, you can have headers. So in this case, content type will specify the type of message you're returning. So in this case, it's going to be HTML file because it's a HTML web page. So you specify content type so your receiver knows that it's getting HTML back. We have the empty line, and then you'd have your message body. So in this case, it'd be like a simple HTML file. In this case, this says hello world. Obviously, it'd be more detailed web page that you're sending back in most cases. That's what your message body will have. So again, your status line has the version, this code, and we'll talk about code shortly, and then a textual value of that code. You'd have multiple headers that specify other things. I don't know what can be in there, but just look up headers for responses or requests and kind of get more detailed information about what you can contain in there. And then your body contains your actual data that your client is going to use. All right, so let's talk about some response status codes. So might be vaguely familiar with this. You might encounter them when you're trying to go to a web page and it doesn't exist. But they're broken up into 5 buckets. So in your 100 error codes, that's just information. So like one example is status code 102, which means your request is still processing. So we've not completed your requests. You might get that back from a server. If it's like a large request, they might send you intermittent responses saying, hey, still processing, like we haven't forgotten about you. That'd be error code or status code 102. Anything in the 200 range is generally success. So 200 just means okay, like, hey, we found what you're looking for. Status code 200 means we're good. Anything in the 300 range are redirects. So this is like, if google.com got relocated to mygoogle.com, I don't know. That you'd probably get a 300 error status code from going to google.com when they redirect you to the correct page. So like 301 would be like, hey, this location has moved permanently. It's not like a temporary redirect, but there's many codes out there for redirects. Client error, so this is probably one of the most famous ones we've probably seen, the 404 page, which just means, hey, you tried going to donuts.html, but that page doesn't exist. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. You probably had the wrong page, so check your links or whatever it may be, because we don't have what you're looking for. So that's error codes in the 400s. And then we have the 500s. This is more server error. That's saying, hey, the server saying, hey, it's my fault actually. You requested something, but hey, I'm not currently available right now, or something went wrong. So not your fault. I'll handle it, and then maybe get a request later. But yeah, so these are just sample error codes. Again, there's tons out there. If you want to quickly gander at them, let's go to HTTP dogs. So this is a fun little website. If you're a fan of dogs, I know we have a lot of pet owners out there. So if you go to HTTP status dogs, they kind of show you error codes and I guess the dog representation of what that would be. So there's a bunch of error codes like partial content. We have a dog that's missing a leg. It's kind of sad, but it seems pretty happy enough. I don't know. We have a found a bone. That's 302 area code, or not area code, status code. But yeah, just a lot of dog pictures. Here we have 414, which is URI too long. So there might be a limit to how long your URI can be. So this dog definitely on the larger side. But you kind of just have fun with this. If you're a cat fan, there's a cat version, so don't feel left out. There's I think this is the right one. Yep, HTTP status cats, and you have your cat representation of status codes. So kind of just look at this if you're accept cookies. But yep, again, pet fans out there, you kind of learn HTTP status codes that way. All right, I'm trying to get to. All right, those are status codes. That kind of completes HTTP. Again, just kind of understand that's the communication protocol that's used between client and server. So your web browser is talking to a server out there, requesting pages. So if you wanted to actually see that, let's actually kind of investigate that. So I'm going to bring up my developer panel. I'm actually in Firefox, but it's the same command. Here, I'm going to go to a new page. Let's go to just google.com. All right, let me bring up my panel first. So Option Command I brings up my panel here. Let me make that bigger and zoom in a bit. All right, I'm going to go to this, where is it? Network tab. And then I'm actually going to go to google.com here. And let's actually see what my network tab has. Google.com. All right, notice that I got a GET request. I got a bunch of GET requests. So, it's not just one GET request. There's multiple things going on in the background. So, there's a GET for google.com. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. I'm not even sure what Google's doing here. But there's some post requests that get in there, and you have status codes. So like 200 means it was okay. 204, I'm not sure what that means, but 200 means generally everything went right. We have some 302s, so there's maybe some redirects. I see ad service, so maybe they're trying to redirect us. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, you can investigate like all the requests that your browser's making to a web server and what your status codes are. Yeah, as you can see, multiple requests are made just going to a single web page. All right, so you guys can kind of mess with that if you're curious about what requests your web pages are sending. But don't want to spend too much time on that. Got more material. All right, finally we're going to get to JavaScript Fetch. So this is the whole idea. Again, we talked about HTTP. Fetch allows you to send HTTP requests and process them with promises, so that you can make a request to google.com and then get some information back, or more like Google Maps or weather.com. Again, there's a lot of information out there. You want to request it, but you don't always want to block your application. So we talked about asynchronous code versus synchronous code. Like if I make a request to weather.com to figure out what the weather is for today in Chicago, I don't want to wait for that response before I can proceed if I can do other stuff in the meantime. So like if that request winds up taking 20 seconds, I don't want my web page to be frozen for 20 seconds while I'm waiting on the weather information to come in. Like my web page might show weather, might show like some sports news, maybe some, I don't know, some politic news. Like I might have different requests I'm making. I don't need to wait on weather to show other information on my web page if it's like a news web page. So that's where Fetch comes into play. So I actually have a little video here.
That is so Fetch. Gretchen, stop trying to make Fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
All right, so that's from a movie called Mean Girls. I don't know if, hopefully you guys seen it. Nice little comedy, but that's from 2004. So Fetch was a word that Gretchen, a character, was trying to make popular, but Regina, who's this character, she's kind of lead, I guess, alpha female, and she's kind of mean. So, she's trying to shut down Fetch from happening, but guess what? Fetch actually happened because JavaScript uses it. All right, so what is Fetch? Fetch is a function that fetches data for you, like simply put. It's not too complicated to kind of understand that, but more specifically, it's a function that you can use in your JavaScript to make HTTP requests on the web. Fetch takes in a URL as a parameter. So basically like where you're making a request to. And then fetch returns a promise. So again, this is the thing we spent the last hour talking about, promises. So it's an asynchronous request, like, hey, go get me some data. Once that data is available, it's gonna be returned to you via a promise. So the promise will resolve and say, hey, I found your data successfully, or hey, something went wrong, didn't find it. The key thing to note here is that for HTTP requests, you're not gonna get a failure case if you get a bad status code. So what I mean by that is, like, let's say you try to request donuts.html and that page does not exist. The server is likely going to respond, hey, 404 with a code 404 saying, hey, page not found. But it's not going to say, hey, I failed at my task. It's still going to return success, but your error code is going to be 404. So you want to actually investigate your error or your status code. Sorry, I keep saying error code. Your status code to see actually what happened with your request. So if you get a status code of 200, you'd be like, all right, I found the web page or whatever resource I'm trying to find. If I get an error status code of 400 or something, then I probably want to do something different. Like, hey, didn't find what I was looking for. Maybe you re-request it, or just proceed and do something else. Like maybe I could, get by without weather information. That's fine. All right. So that's kind of what fetch is. Let's actually take a look at syntax. So again, fetch is pretty easy to use. The documentation, you could read up on it also, but pretty straightforward. So I just call fetch. Again, it's a pre-built function. And I pass it a URL. So this is a very simple example. I assign that to request. Remember that request is a promise, right? So fetch returns a promise to me. And so I could chain a .then to it. So when I call that promise, .then can handle the response. So in this case, a very simple example, the response I get back from that promise we'll have a okay, I guess, parameter. And we kind of investigate this in our code. But that okay will be a status code. So if that status code, if that's between 200, okay will be true. So response.okay is just a value that a server passes back. And I can investigate that. And if it's true, then I could just do something because I could assume that I successfully got what I was looking for my request. All right, so again, fetch is the key component here. It returns a promise. And then we could use .then from like any other promise. And that .then will execute once our fetch completes and has something to return to us. So again, the common case is you're making a request to a third-party website. You don't want to wait on that response to do other stuff on your website. Again, you don't want to have your user waiting for like 20 seconds or however long it takes to make a request. Like they should still be able to interact with your web page and see other data while like stuff's going on in the background. And that background, again, is someone else processing or doing a task for you. All right, so then we have an example of post. So the first case was get. If you're using a get, you don't really have to specify additional values. So fetch can take in more than one parameter. It requires a URL and then can take in optional parameters. But for a get, you don't really have to specify too much else. And this goes back to the HTTP syntax or format. But for a post, you got to actually specify that you wanted to use post. So in the post case, you got to provide more information. In this case, you call fetch with the some URL, but then also pass it an object. So that object will contain values that fetch requires. So for the HTTP method, you want post in this case. So you specify a key of post and a value of post. Sorry, a key of method and then a value of post. Also, if you want to pass some headers, that'll be a nested object. So in this case, my content type, I'm saying I'm posting something that's JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notification, just another standard format out there. And then my body is going to actually contain, like in this case, I'm submitting a comment. So maybe I'm posting on Facebook and submitting a comment. So it's going to turn that comment into a JSON format so that my server can parse that JSON and understand what I'm trying to send it. All right, so that's the syntax for post. Again, you have your URL, but your second parameter is going to be an object with a whole lot of information in there. And you want to specify the method you're using. Again, usually post, could be put, could be delete. You can specify get here also. It's optional. When you're using get, you don't need this additional parameter. But if you want to specify additional data values for your get, then you could definitely do that. And then same thing. You process your request, then will get called when your response is ready. So it's the same way you handle it. It's just the method you're using can be different. Okay, so let's go to key takeaways. Actually, let me back up a step. So trying to wrap this up if I can find my browser. All right, so let's actually look at our curriculum page. So this actually has some stuff on it. I'm not going to actually go through all of it, just in the interest of time. But now we can kind of get to the getting data with fetch. So they have an example here. So we actually do this example quickly because they have code coded up for us. A note, I've mentioned this before to students and just want to reiterate, anytime you're copying code, make sure you understand what it's doing. Don't just copy it, blindly and say, all right, I'm just going to paste it and do whatever. Always take the extra few seconds, kind of just read it and make sure you understand generally what it's doing. Maybe not every specifics, but I understand this is an HTML document, has some meta tags, which I'm not too well versed on, but that's just additional data. And also have like a couple divs that have some text in it. So again, just be mindful of what you're copying and pasting. Don't just do it blindly without understanding it. So let me get out of this example. All right, let's create a file called index.html. I'm just going to paste what I copied. So in this case, it's an HTML document. It has some text in it. Welcome to my web page. Interesting article goes here. And then I need a script. So JavaScript file. In this case, it's going to be called script.js, since that's what's specified in the code that we copied. And then the script is going to have some additional code in it. So let me get some more real estate here. All right, so again, I'm just following along on the curriculum page. They have this script that they want us to add. So script.js, it looks like it's grabbing an item from my HTML page and response data, and that's a class because we have a dot. So remember, a hash mark means ID, dot means class. So if I actually look for that class, I find this div that has that class response data. So I know that we're grabbing this element in our JavaScript and doing something on it. And then we have this fetch code. So we'll look at this closely once we paste it. So let me grab that and paste. All right. So again, this is all from the curriculum page, so you guys can do it on your own and kind of follow along if you're following along with it. All right, let's take a look at this. So we grab our response container. Again, this is a div element from our HTML page, and then we're using fetch. All right, so this is the method that we just talked about. So fetch is calling a URL. In this case, it's JSON placeholder typicode.com, which is the website out there. And then once we get a response, that's RESP, response. Again, you can name that whatever you want. Once we get a response, we're going to call .json method, which is another promise that gets returned to us. Since that's another promise, we could chain a dot then all that also. All right. So again, this is fat arrow notation. Notice that we don't have curly braces here, and that's because we have one statement, and that's our return statement. So we don't have to write return here. We could do that without. Let me see if this code is here. All right, so yep, so we process response, we call JSON, which will convert it to a JSON format, and then we could actually extract values from it. So let's actually take a look at what we're requesting. So I'm going to copy this URL and actually go to that web browser. So let me place that here and take a look at our data. All right, so as you can see, this is a JSON data file that's located at the URL that we went to. And this has a few key value pairs. So we have user ID 1, ID equals 1. We have a title. That's something in Latin, Delectus aux autumn. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. We also have something called completed. So some key value pairs that our JSON has. So if we looked at it, it looks like an object for the most part. And then we could also look at some headers, but that's not too helpful for me right now. All right, so basically we're trying to extract this information. So we're making this request, and we're going to get this data sent back to us so everything goes correctly. All right, so let's try to do this in our code. And I'm actually going to modify this code a little bit so we can actually investigate some stuff while we're going through it. So I'm going to actually have to add some curly braces here because I want this fat arrow function to have multiple lines. So I'm going to actually, let's just do a console.log of response to see what that looks like. And I'm actually not going to look at my console, but put a breakpoint there. And then likewise, I'm going to put console.log for my JSON. I don't actually need these consoles. I can investigate it without it. But, all right, my tabbing's all screwed up because I copy and pasted, but we'll live with it. All right, so I'm going to put a breakpoint here and here. All right, so again, just to review, we're calling fetch, which is going to go to this website or this URL, get some data, and then it's going to actually respond to us. That's what JSON placeholder is going to do for us. It's going to respond with some data. We're going to take that data and then call .json on it, and we'll go from there. All right.
You need to reinsert your return statement.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Good catch. All right. so I have my breakpoints set here, so we can kind of stop and kind of investigate these values and see what's contained in them. This is my JavaScript file, but I'm actually going to run my index file. So I'm going to go to index.html. Hopefully everything is set up correctly. Start debugging. It's going to ask for Chrome, so I'll go for Chrome. Chrome pops up. Okay, so sorry, my webpage didn't really show anything, but we got a response already from our JSON placeholder. So let's actually take a look at that response. So I'm going to hover over it and kind of see these details. Again, hopefully it's not too small for you guys. Let me try to blow this up a bit. All right. All right, so my RESP value is actually a dictionary, or an object, sorry. And this object has a bunch of values in it. If you notice, there's a status code. So I can't really move my mouse because that's what my tooltip is under. Maybe I could do a debug here. Yeah, that might be better. All right, let me look at my debug window. All right, so response has all these things in it. All right, so we have a body used, we have headers. All right, I was using that property OK before. Notice that this is a Boolean, so OK is true in this case. Status, this is a status code that's returned to me from the server. So in this case, 200 means OK, as in things went well. But again, if it didn't find what I was looking for, it might be status code 404, or it might be something else. But you have a whole list of information, something the URL. You kind of inspect this for any additional information, but for the most part, I just care about status and OK and the actual value that it gives back to me. All right, so I'm gonna zoom out because this is too gigantic for me. And we're gonna proceed. So again, we're gonna call resp.json, and that's .json method actually returns another promise. So that's why we chain on another then. And that JSON is basically gonna parse the JSON data, and then once it's done parsing it, it's gonna call back and say, hey, we have your JSON data. So we're gonna continue by hitting the play button. All right, so then we're in our next promise handler. In this case, we're going to look at JSON. And yeah, so again, let me blow this up. All right, so if you look at JSON here, I don't know, like, where are these windows? Call stack. All right, more space. Great. All right, so if you look at our JSON object, this is actually what we saw on the web page, right? So we have a completed key and then a value of false. We have an ID. We have a user ID. We also had a title, and the title is actually what we care about in our example here. So the title is Delectus Aux Autumn. And so in this case, we're going to take the title, so JSON.title, because we know that title field exists. We're going to assign it to the inner HTML of that div object that we had before. All right, so basically, effectively what we're doing is we made a request, we get like a text value back, and we want to apply that text value into our web page. All right, so I'm going to continue, and my web page worked. Obviously, we didn't see what my web page was doing, so let me get rid of these breakpoints, and let's relaunch that. All right, no breakpoints, just deletes. All right, let me run this. I'm gonna run my HTML file. Run, start debugging. Sure, want Chrome. All right, pops my window. All right, I don't know if you guys saw that, so let me actually relaunch that. Let me just refresh it, that should work. All right, here's my webpage. So it has a title. That's something we had before. Interesting article title goes here. That's something we had hard-coded. Both this Delectus Autumn is actually something that we fetched and requested and then updated our webpage. So if I refresh this, I guess we're not going to see this correctly. All right, so pay attention to the webpage when it pops up. So notice that there's no title here. It makes a request, it's processing it, and then boom, once it's done processing, we got the title shown. So again, that's asynchronous. It takes some time. So we don't want to halt our web page, as in we want to load all these items. We don't want to just wait for this to get loaded before we show something. So that's an example of using fetch to kind of do something asynchronously, ask for, request something, and then process it once it's ready. We don't have to wait for it. It'll get back to us when it's ready. All right, so again, this is just from the curriculum page, if I can find it again. Yep. So sorry, I copied this portion. So this was a GET request. We also do a post. So I'm actually not going to spend time doing the post, but you guys can kind of go through this on your own. You can use a website called puts.req. This kind of just automatically creates a response for you. So you can create a put request. It'll give you a custom URL, and then you could kind of tailor your response message. So in this case, like let's say you post something, like you fill out a form and you post your name. This will take your name and then respond with a hello, what's your name? So in this case, we provide more additional code. So if you kind of just follow along on your curriculum page, we post this on the server side. So in this case, we take the name from the body. So this will be like a form with a name field. We extract that value and then put it into our response message. And that's what's returned back to your client. So again, this can be an exercise you guys do in the afternoon or whenever you get time. But again, this is a little different than get. Get is just requesting data and reading something. Post is actually sending data and updating something. And then put request website is going to take that data and give you a response from the data you sent it. So again, if you give it the name of Roger, it should respond with hello Roger with what it has right now. So again, you will take your URL, and then we have more code that we give you. So we have a sample form. So this is how you're going to actually submit your post request. And then we have a JavaScript snippet here. The key point here is make sure you post your URL from puts request into this point. So this endpoint variable should be your URL from the site. All right, so that will give you an introduction into posting messages and kind of how a client and server might communicate. Yeah, so take a look at that when you get a chance. Again, I don't want to take up too much time since we're well into lunchtime here. But yeah, so kind of follow along. We have code for you. It should work pretty straightforward. We have a lot of text here, so hopefully it's easy to follow along. So that's what we're going to cover for Fetch. Let's take a quick look at our assignments for tonight, and then we can kind of get to our lunch break. So two main assignments here. We have a simple to-do, so let me pop that up and talk about it. And then we have HTTP server 1. All right, so simple to do. This is just getting more familiar with using local storage. Again, we kind of did an example earlier today, kind of showing how you can store values in your browser storage or your local storage and extract it. We're going to kind of build off of that. So we're actually going to create something that's sort of useful. In this case, we're going to create a to-do page. So your website, your web page will simply be able to add tasks. So for example, if I need to do the laundry and then, maybe read a book or, I don't know, pay my bills. I don't know. I might have a list of tasks. I should have the ability to add tasks to the web page. So dynamically, it should update with the tasks that I add. And also, I should be able to check off items. So for example, let's say I add like do laundry, wash dishes, and pay bills. Let's say I wash my dishes because I wanted to eat cereal. I should be able to somehow check that off on my web page. And this is where we're kind of pointing you to Bootstrap to have some maybe some additional styling you want, like make it look fancy. You can kind of just update the style to make it strike through. So when you click it, it just strikes it off your list. And maybe if you click it again, it might unstrike it in case you didn't quite complete it. But it's kind of, again, left to your creative tastes, but just make sure you have the functionality where you can add items, check them off, and kind of make that persist between sessions. So if I have my to-do list, I close my browser, bring that to-do list back up, I should see my items still there and have it checked off if I checked them off. All right, so pretty straightforward, simple to-do page, kind of fun challenge there, kind of connecting all the topics we talked about, which is local storage, using JavaScript, and also using CSS for a web page. But the longer challenge, the more, difficult challenge will be HTTP server 1. I know Tom mentioned that this is probably one of the more difficult challenges throughout the curriculum. So, definitely a lot to it. If I'm just scrolling, there's a lot to read on it. So definitely don't think you're going to be done with this in 15 minutes for the most part. You're going to have to read a lot and kind of tinker with it and kind of understand using new concepts. In this case, we're using a socket. We're trying to simulate a server. So we're on the other side of the equation where we might have a web page that sends us a request. We want to act as a server and kind of process that request. If they send us a GET, we want to send them a resource. Like if it's a web page, send them a web page. Maybe they're looking for JSON data. I don't know. But if they give us a post, for example, if they send us information, we actually want to react to that information. Like if it's a form that's requesting something, we need to process it and say, okay, you requested 2 donuts. Let me give you back 2 donuts, via web browser, not actual donuts, but like donut information, for example. Again, so read this page. There's a lot to it. Take your time with it. Definitely understand what you're doing. Again, we're simulating a server. That's not something you normally will have to do. There are web servers out there that do your job, do the job more efficiently, and it's automatically there. But we just want to give you the experience of understanding what a server is actually tests with, and kind of how to handle HTTP requests and provide HTTP responses from there. So yeah, you might have to mess with some status codes. Like if they request something that doesn't exist, make sure you give it a correct status code. so your client knows that how you processed it. But yeah, give this a read. This is a multi-part challenge also. So we have HTTP server 1. I think it goes 1, 2, and 3, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, so that'll be your challenge for tonight. So get started with that when you get a chance. Definitely be kind of lengthy, but hopefully be good, good practice with HTTP requests. All right, that was a lot of information I threw at you guys. Again, apologies for a long lecture and kind of eating into your lunchtime, but hopefully you guys kind of understand the topics. Again, asynchronous. Let's go to my slides to finish that off. Key takeaways: know what asynchronous code is, what code execution is. Again, that's the idea of doing things in parallel. Well, you have someone else doing your task, and you can proceed with your application, rather than having your application kind of wait on one line, then doing the next line to the next line. Again, that makes sense in some cases, but for web pages, you need web pages to be responsive. So usually they're making multiple requests, and you don't want to freeze up your web page and kind of not show your user anything in that case. Also, know what a promise is in JavaScript and how to use it. Again, this is kind of like the newer way to handle asynchronous requests. A promise just provides a formal, template where you can give a promise to someone and they know how to respond to it. They could give you a, callback. They could execute a callback if they have successfully completed your task, or even if they failed to do it, it's handled more gracefully in that case. Also, we went over the basics of HTTP. The key takeaway from that is just understand the request methods, namely get and post. Just know the difference between those and when they're used. Again, get is used when you're just reading information or requesting information. Post is more used for when you're submitting information. So typical use case is when you're filling out a form and you hit submit. That's actually going to be a post request, not a get request. Finally, know what fetch is in JavaScript and understand how to use it. Again, the API is pretty straightforward. So you just pass a URL and maybe some additional information to pass the HTTP request to whoever you're sending your request to. And then, again, understand that fetch returns a promise. And that's kind of how you can respond to requests. So you ask for the weather from weather.com. When they have the weather information, they'll give you some information back, and then you can proceed to use that weather information to do whatever you want for your web page. All right, guys. Thanks again for bearing with a long lecture here. I'm going to stop the recording now.